Thank you everyone for coming today to the spring session of the Management Department's webinar series. So today we're going to broadly talk about what does inflation, interest rates, FX risk, and maybe other things that are going on in the environment mean for businesses in the labor market. We have three great panelists who are all on the Management Department's advisory board, who I would like to say were willing to take their time today out of their busy schedules in very, very short notice. So we really thank them for that. And thanks for Mike and Don for helping set all of this stuff up. So my name is Cameron Miller. I'm a professor here in the Management Department, and I'm going to be moderating this. So for those who are joining, if you have questions, just please put them in the Q&A. We'll probably take those when we can as we go along. So I'm going to start out with allowing each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So let me start with you, Stephanie. Tell me a little bit about yourself, what your role is, and your connection to Whitman.
Sure. No, sounds good. Hi, everybody. Good morning from California. I'm based out of Malibu, California. I work for a big biotech company out here called Amgen. So my connection to Whitman, I graduated in the class of 2007. So, grew up in upstate New York. It is warmer out here in case anybody's interested in a California lifestyle. It's a lot warmer. So that's nice. But joined GE right out of school, actually with the help of Professor Ravi, who pointed me in the direction of the financial management program. I studied finance and marketing at Syracuse. Spent 8 or 9 years living all over the world with GE. Landed in Singapore in aviation, GE Aviation, before jumping over to biotech. I realized I'm actually just coming up on almost 10 years at Amgen now at this point, which is a little scary. So been at Amgen about 10 years, have had a great career here so far. And currently in their commercial organization, mostly in commercial operations. I've run a bunch of their customer capability things, including things like congresses. I own their companion diagnostics teams, their patient support programs, and a couple other things that just are very, very important in our interaction with our patients that use our therapeutics and use our medicines. So happy to be here and happy to answer any kinds of questions. It's an exciting time to be in business, and I think you have a great panel here with my colleagues and myself. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Stephanie, and we'd all love to join you in Malibu if you'll pay for our living expenses.
Fair enough. Taxes are no joke out here.
All right, Mark, I'm going to turn to you and let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm still waiting on that invite to California too, to be honest with you. But
it's an open invite, Mark.
There you go. There you go. Good morning, everybody from sunny New York City this morning. I'm a 2005 grad of Whitman, studied finance and marketing myself, did a little Newhouse for a couple of years as well. I started in the investment banking world on the trading side at Morgan Stanley in 2005. And I've been kind of working my way through the Wall Street, roles ever since. So I kind of built a team at Morgan Stanley. Then I went to another few banks, Wells Fargo and Deutsch Bank, and ran their investment grade credit trading business, which in layman's terms, that means bonds, not stocks, but bonds. And then from there, I took a job at a hedge fund, and now I'm running a portfolio of money for Millennium Capital. And I just started this job about a month ago. I'm really excited. It's been a fun start. But so I've done a little bit of everything. I've done the trading and sales operations. I know a lot about investment banking, and now I am managing money and seeing if I can make money off of that. So I look forward to the conversation, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Mark. Stephen?
Hey, good morning from dreary Memphis, Tennessee. It's raining pretty good down here. Let's see, I began my career as an officer in the Army. Did that for a little bit. Lived in different parts of upstate New York, grand total of around 15, 17 years. I am a 2009 graduate of the IMBA program at the Whitman School. In terms of my career at FedEx, I started there 19 years ago this month. Started as a pickup and delivery manager for heavyweight freight. So I had truck drivers. and one international specialist. From there, I moved into international planning and engineering, supporting the U.S. export market. I've been doing a lot of that ever since, mainly U.S. export to Asia, in terms of planning different airframes, different routes, what markets we're going to fly to, when we're going to fly there, how products move from the U.S. to Asia. I had a stint as a purchasing manager buying commercial space on passenger and other cargo airlines. I've moved back into more of the freight world in terms of sort systems. Right now, my current project is designing a new sort system for the Memphis hub for air freight. So if I had to sum up my career, 19 years of air freight experience in just about every form or fashion you can think of. So that's me.
Well, while you got your mic on, let me start with you. So what's one of the key challenges that a company like FedEx is facing right now? Or at least maybe you're facing in your role or within your unit?
Well, as an airline, we have enormous fixed costs. It's an expensive business running an airline, and maintaining flexibility with our customers and keeping up with our customers is always a challenge. Customers are mobile, and so we have to keep our network flexible enough to serve demand that may pop up anywhere in the world. Usually changes in those trends are slow, but occasionally they get really fast, and it can be difficult to keep up.
Well, Stephanie, in the world of biotech and recombinant DNA, what's going on in the environment right now that's creating challenges maybe for Amgen?
Yeah, I think, for us, I mean, we have a ton of challenges that most businesses that include a manufacturing component struggle with. Rising costs of raw materials, shipping costs. So, we have a massive supply chain network. So, we're using shipping companies as well and feel a lot of those pressures too. But for us, I think the biggest thing, especially in my world, in the commercial operations world, that we're looking at is the government. So the Biden administration, what's going on in the political environment. We have a large government affairs team that sits in Washington and is really trying to just keep track of all the moving parts. But for us, it's the new price controls around the top 20 drugs. For those of you who haven't been exposed to drug development, why would you have? But it's a very, very long cycle process, very expensive, and the success rate is less than 10%. So that's something that the company is looking at. But to bring a drug to market, it's like if we're trying to cure cancer, right, it's going to take 10 plus years to bring a drug, to bring it through the development process, bring it through all the clinical trials, get it through approval. And on average, it costs about $11 billion, and your success rate is just under 10%. So if you start to control the prices on the back end, that innovation pipeline stops. And that's something that our teams and our lobbyists are really trying to iterate to the business, to the governments, and saying, hey, we need this in order to keep innovation going. So that's been an ongoing debate for a long time. But the most recent administration has really kind of cracked down on some of those. So that's the biggest thing for us is the political environment, particularly in the United States, which is our biggest market.
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So this is with something like the US market. If it was a different market, you can diversify away. But given, price controls and single payer systems and other situations, is there any other tactics that you can use other than just basically government affairs and trying to persuade, some common sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could look at different parts of the drug development cycle and look to kind of cut costs there. We also own the largest independent genetics company in the world. It's actually based in Iceland, and it classifies all the genetic data for basically the entirety of the Icelandic people. But what that does, it gives you a homogeneous pool of genetic data that you can really feed upon and learn a lot from when you're looking at targets, drug targets for things that work and things that might react to certain medicines better than others. And it's just a phenomenal research tool. So you could look at different points. So you can look at that. Okay, how do we do a better job where we increase that percentage of success rate early on? Maybe we double that. Maybe we double that to 20%, where we know that our drug target is going to be better. Maybe you improve your process all the way through, like your own clinical trial process, your own everything process, your own bringing to market process. So there is a lot of things in your control that you have to start to look at if you're controlled on that back end. But to your point, also, yeah, it's completely different in every single market, right? Our US is our largest market by far, but Japan is second, Germany's third, and each market has its own unique regulations, its own laws, its own environment, its own patient population. Gastric cancer is really very, very, very big. It's going to be a very big problem in China soon. So how are you looking at that differently? So it's very much this macroeconomic model, and me in a global role gets a chance to get exposure to all of those different moving parts across the world.
Very exciting.
Mhm.
So Mark, I'm guessing in your role, sometimes other people's challenges is your opportunity now that you're on the hedge fund side. So maybe you could mention some of the challenges you're having, but maybe start us off into the next part is what type of opportunities you're seeing in this environment as well, given your unique situation.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to listen to Stephanie and Steve and on my side of the lens is basically trying to assess and forecast and model how these companies are actually handling supply chain issues, how these companies are handling pricing pressures and price increases, and seeing which companies actually have pricing power and customer captivity, right? So versus ones that don't. So what we're seeing, or we're starting to see, and what we're trying to model, what I'm trying to do, I say we, it's really me, is model the winners from the losers in this inflationary environment. We know which companies, take for example, and Amgen is a biotech behemoth in the world globally, and to hear that all these supply chain pressures do affect them is one thing, but then you take a company like a Pepsi or Coke, another market leader, and you see them just passing the prices on to consumers because they have the customer captivity. So it's kind of assessing who can and who cannot in this environment, and it's stressful for everybody, to be quite honest with you. But you're really starting to see companies have real slowdowns. Take for example, last week there was a headline: Spirit Aerosystems, which supplies Boeing with some of their critical parts for their fuselage, and they're having an issue supplying parts because of one of their suppliers is having problems because the pricing is too high. So you do see this whole ecosystem actually evolve, and what I'm trying to do is find out who are going to be the companies that have issues with such an environment on a sustained basis, versus some of the companies that will be able to pass prices along to consumers on a more sustained basis. But an inflationary environment like this, usually does crimp the consumer, and we're starting to see signs of, if you listen to CNBC and all the pundits, they'll tell you that the consumer is really strong and this, that, and the other, but you're starting to see cracks in the system. The banking crisis of a month ago is a real crack in the system. The Spirit Aero system is a real crack in the system. Stephanie's point, if she is trying to get X, Y, or Z, and the cost is up 6-7%, can you put that through with drug pricing caps? Can you kind of find a way to put that pricing through the customer? It's getting harder and harder. So what you are starting to see is you're starting to see on a real small scale, you're starting to see some M&A pick back up, which usually happens at the end of an inflationary environment, but you're starting to see that now in the biotech arena anyways. And so for me, it's just modeling where there's opportunities in the market. All right. If something's trading drastically too cheap to me, I'm going to want to be a buyer of it. And if something I think is really set up for failure, and I'll quickly use Tesla as an example. Tesla has this amazing, I mean, it's something maybe the students, it's a name the students probably follow more than most. Tesla's got this amazing near monopoly on the market with a ton of entrants trying to come in right now, right? But they are the best in breed, and it's by a long shot. And they have this massive pricing power. All right. So what Elon Musk is doing now is seeing 15 competitors, 20 competitors come in making what I would call comparable or better cars. However, at what price point? And his structure is just is something where he can actually lower the prices and still maintain some margins, but at what cost? So Tesla reported earnings 2 days ago, yesterday, excuse me, and the gross margins were down 300 basis points or 3%, and the stock is having a real issue with that. So I was ahead of this actually. I was short Tesla for the last 2 months because all these price cuts do affect margin. Now, on a long-term basis, Elon Musk game might be correct, but on a short-term basis, if you're trimming your margins by 300 basis points, it does hit the bottom line. So why did this happen? It's because of this environment. So I'll just end it there. But long-winded way of saying there are opportunities abound.
Yeah, well, just maybe a follow-up from that, and then we kind of go into the environment of rising rates. So you're seeing higher interest rates. This is meaning higher cost of capital. You're just seeing maybe a little bit of a pullback from the riskier companies. So just from your point of view, where are you seeing maybe a deficit of access to capital? And what are some of the opportunities or challenges out there that, from your perspective, you could maybe take advantage of?
I'll say real briefly. I mean, just think about it holistically. If something, if you wanted to take a mortgage out on a house and went from 3% to 7%, what that borrowing cost is. If you take that to the whole ecosystem, and if you're a company that wants to borrow money to do something, it just became a lot more expensive. So, in the bond arena, which is very linked to inflation, if Amgen wants to go buy a company, which actually they just did. I actually just traded some Amgen bonds early this morning, Steph. I thought about you. And
yeah, Horizon Therapeutics goes through soon.
Yeah,
I'm working
exactly.
on that acquisition.
Exactly. And so they funded that with a bunch of debt, but 2 years ago they could have funded that at 4%. Now they funded it at 5.5% average. Multiply that by 30 billion. That's a big difference. So you do see this strain just from literally from a math perspective on what it does, and it's a matter of if you can have an environment where the accretiveness of such an acquisition still is better than the cost of capital.
No, that's a great point. Maybe I'll turn over to you, Stephen. Both kind of internally when you're thinking about projects, maybe it's your customers who are bearing the brunt of a little rising cost of capital, maybe access to capital. Are you seeing any of that play through into your business, and how, what was a viable project when interest rates were 2% versus 3 months at 5%? Like, how is those things maybe changing y'all's perspective, if at all, yet?
The best example I can think of is our acquisition of TNT. That was a company that everybody fought over for years, went back and forth trying to make a good case on why we should buy it, whether it was UPS or us. So it ended up being us, and it has not played out the way everybody would have liked it to, because of really unforeseeable, unforecastable events. The only thing that's keeping that deal making any sense is because we were able to finance it at such a low interest rate at the time, that it's been a cushion ever since. I think a large part of that purchase was financed through our first ever Deutsche Bond that we issued through Deutsch Bank. And they practically paid us to borrow the money. And that was just timing. And so borrowing at 0% has made that business case favorable ever since. Now, what we didn't know was that maybe 6-9 months after we bought them, they were going to be infected by a computer virus that shut down their entire import, export, and airline management system. And basically they would have folded had we not been there to intervene and rescue them and basically take all their freight from their customers and do the work for them to move it and clear it. So if we waited a year, they would have gone out of business and we would have just cherry picked all their customers. Who knew? But
Better be lucky than good.
It was, yeah, it was an example of when a company starts to go under, first thing they do is cut back on costs. And one of the things they cut back on severely was IT investment. And that just over time, they underinvested in IT and eventually it caught up with them. They got hit with ransomware and we literally had to go out and buy them all new computers and just swap them out.
I really like this example because it shows to the students where you start making cuts, there's going to be consequences, right? There's trade-offs in every decision, and it's sometimes the short run decision that bites you in the butt in the long run. And this seems like a perfect example of that.
Yep, it makes perfect sense at the time, but it'll catch up with you eventually.
Well, Stephanie, let me turn to you in terms of, so Amgen, of course, paying a little bit more for acquisition that gives you less flexibility. But when I was thinking about this question from your perspective, and maybe this is not right at all, but you have lots of different partners. I mean, it might be Amgen can go and tap markets. They may have to pay a little bit more for some of the other companies that you partner with or have alliances with. Are there worries that they're going to be as financially sound given the current framework?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. Yep. So Amgen is in partnership a lot of times on the commercial side, where you'll have either launch or rights to selling a drug in certain markets, and so then you partner the sales forces. It's a nice opportunity because you can bring these, very complex drugs over the finish line together with joint investment. So it splits, the risk of the investment in half, and then you share things like your sales forces, which are massive investments. To the other two of my colleagues' points, it's when you start cutting back, where do you cut? Amgen went and we cut back on Salesforce, which was hard to do, but it was also in coordination with COVID. So you also couldn't get into, especially doctors' offices. Doctors' offices came back later. So, but now we're feeling the after effects of that but through cutting your sales force. So we did a lot of these alliances with who are main competitors in a lot of cases. We have partnerships with AstraZeneca, who's a huge competitor of mine, with GlaxoSmithKline, with Merck, with all these different partners, either through development or launched products. And a lot of times, it's a difficult one. I mean, we're in court now with one of our partners over a patent infringement on a different product than we're partnering with. So it's a very kind of difficult environment to partner with our pharma partners, with our biotech partners. But it is a good opportunity to spread out some of that risk and to spread out some of those operation costs once a product is launched, once a therapeutic is launched. So I think it's an interesting thing. The new acquisition that we have, that will be a full acquisition. The company is called Horizon Therapeutics. We bought it for $24 billion, which is the largest acquisition that Amgen has done in its own history. So it's pretty exciting for us. I am on the acquisition team, but they have a couple of therapeutics already in the market, but their big thing is rare disease, which is something that Amgen isn't necessarily, we don't have a business unit focused on rare disease. And when we say rare disease, we're talking, it's less than 100 patients with these very, very awful diseases. And so a lot of times those will refer to orphan drugs. They'll get things like fast lane approval through FDA because the patients are so in need and there's just no other options for them. But Amgen's really been focused in the oncology space. We're in cardiovascular, we're in osteoporosis. So we're in very different buckets. So this acquisition has been different for us because even though it's so expensive, we're really kind of taking more of a lift and shift in which we're absorbing them with not too many changes, especially day one. So that's supposed to go through mid next month. So mid-May, I think, is the newest closing date. But so that'll be an interesting one because sometimes when you acquire a company, you cut the staff and then you just absorb whatever their products are right into it. But this one's very much going to be a partnership where we take the talent as well. So sometimes when you acquire a company, it's to acquire that talent as well, or you're just acquiring the talent and you don't care about the product. So it's kind of interesting to think about acquisitions and that from a macro perspective as well. Those are the things that are interesting to read about in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, no, this is really interesting. So when I was inviting all of you to join this panel, you'd mentioned your forex exchange and how that's, you know, a company like Amgen that's, you have both revenues spread across the world and cost spread across the world. And when you have different interest rates moving in different ways in different countries, inflation different ways in different countries, you tend to get a lot of FX volatility. So how is something like that affecting your business and rolling into making challenging to make?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that Mark could probably comment on this a little more intelligently than I can. But I mean, the way that we look at it is you're making money and you're spending money in 50 different affiliates around the world. So you have 50 different macroeconomic environments that you're interacting with that all have to report into US GAAP requirements from an accounting perspective. And so depending on how strong or weak the dollar is, it's good because yes, US is also one of our key markets. So you're earning money that in a strong dollar environment. But then when you're converting money from Japan or converting money from Germany, if those are weaker currencies, if the euro is weaker or if the yen is weaker, then you start to really see the impact on the bottom line. So I think that's one huge thing where there's always an FX adjustment that, you know, investors don't really give you a ton of, they're just kind of like, oh, well, it's FX, it's kind of out of your control. But then you could start to get into, you know, different FX hedges and things like that. I'm not in the treasury department, but there is the team that looks at that, especially for a lot of our goods that go into our drug manufacturing process. We do manufacture our own product around the world. We have 3 or 4 here in the US. We have one in Ireland. We have one in Singapore. So there is a bit of diversification there from an FX perspective. It's honestly, it's for a manufacturing risk diversification perspective, not for FX. But so you have a little bit of puts and takes to allow for some flexibility. But I suspect that Mark will be able to comment on that as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I mean, FX isn't my arena as much, but I can speak on it somewhat intelligently. Listen, you have to understand that as you're in line with inflation and how you curb inflation affects the strength of your currency, right? So getting inflation in check and coming back to growth affects your currency greatly. And you're in this global phenomena where every economy right now is fighting the same problem. Right, this is not something where, you know, and if you look at like the history of inflationary environments, a lot of times they're in sub geographies, and maybe it's US one year or US and Europe, but right now you have this global issue, so you have every economy basically fighting the same problem at the same time. And if you look at some economies, right, for example, the US last week had an inflation print that came back down close to 5%, but the UK is having a real hard time fighting inflation right now. So you're going to start to see this basis and the strength of the dollar, and it really does affect, you know, Steph made a great point. It's like, you can only control what you can control with the foreign exchange market, because in some way or fashion, it's a little bit out of your control as a company, right? However, there are tailwinds and headwinds that happen with FX, and you'll see this as the dollar gets stronger or weaker. I would imagine that if our economy gets back to this 2% inflation target, you know, somewhat soon, you know, that's an okay thing. However, the problem is if you get stuck in a slowflation or stagflation environment, it can really actually start to hurt currency. So, you know, and that's kind of my base case personally, and that's how I'm investing on it, because I think that the signs from inflation are going to be really hard to fight when the whole world is fighting the same problem.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm a little pessimistic on the inflation outlook. I kind of take a demographic view.
Same.
I'm looking at the demographics of the world, especially the developed world, and now baby boomers are retiring. They are changing from investors into spenders, and that's going to raise cost of capital. It's also taking a big cohort out of the labor market, and so cost of labor is going to remain sticky high. You know, luckily in the United States, at least, we have a large cohort in the form of millennials to replace baby boomers. Myself, I'm a Gen X. We're the smallest generation, one of the smallest generations. And so we have the experience to replace baby boomers, but there's not enough of us. Millennials are still building out their experience, so they'll get there one day. We just have to hope that they have lots of kids.
Well, this is actually a great inflection point for the conversation, because I wanted to turn a little bit to the labor market, right? So we're coming off a very tight labor market where it's hard to find employees, but maybe it's just normalization, or we're maybe moving towards a little bit more uncertainty, a little bit more rockiness. And we have some students here. Many of them are going to be probably graduating in a couple years. So let me go across the panel and maybe take on 3 questions. You don't have to do them all. What are you seeing in your business in terms of hiring, and what is is there any uncertainty about this, or do you feel it's perhaps slowing? Then from your perspective, what should maybe a new grad be thinking about doing? And if you're in the business already, when should you be thinking about maybe this is time for me to, I'm 4 years out of college, maybe I should think about an MBA, maybe, what are the signs that you should change jobs, retool, go find other skills, et cetera, all which can help you manage the a rocky labor environment a little bit better. So Stephanie, maybe I start with you.
Yeah, sure. It has been a very interesting time, especially with COVID. And then of course, you went through what was always dubbed the Great Resignation, where people were like, oh, there's just too much going on. I'm going to prioritize myself. I'm leaving my job. And for the first time ever, a lot of people left their jobs without having a job to go to, because there were a lot of opportunities that were available. I think that there have been articles about that since. I just read one from Harvard Business Review recently where people were kind of like, oh shoot, that probably wasn't my best idea. I'm kind of regretting that a little bit. But that's something that, it caused, at least Amgen has about 25,000 employees, to really take a look at, okay, what's making our staff happy? How are we keeping them? How are we making sure we're keeping top talent? Because that's the other thing is the people that were leaving were top talent that were getting pushed. There was this, very, very aggressive market for some time during COVID that we didn't expect. I think what we see now that we're kind of post-COVID, we're out of that. The biggest thing that I hear a lot of people talking about is the ability to work remotely. And that's a big thing for a lot of staff as to whether or not they have to relocate to the company headquarters, or if they can do a job remotely. Amgen is a company that, I am based in California. I'm 20 minutes from the headquarters. And I think there's benefits to that, by the way, but it's actually increased our talent pool significantly for the fact that we do not require people to relocate now to various hubs or various locations. They can live wherever you want. Think about, the amount of talent that you have access to because of that going forward. So, and there's also companies that are saying, no, you have to be in person, and certain types of people look for that environment too. So it's really, I think that's the unique thing that we're seeing here in a lot of the big corporations, is saying, do you have to be in the office or not? Because that's a huge driver for whether or not talent want to work at a certain company. And it also has implications for things like productivity, things like, just everything around how the company is functional. But we are also seeing a lot of competition right now. Lots of applicants for any kind of open roles. So it's a great market for those of us looking for the talent right now, at least in this field. But I would say the biggest driver for us, or the biggest thing for us that we found, is access to talent by opening up where we can hire from.
Stephanie, kind of a follow-up question to that. Mm-hmm. So in the industry, are you seeing very similar trends amongst all your rivals, where if you were to say, no, you have to be in the office, that you're just not going to be able to pull in some of that talent? So it's whether it seems that you can broaden your scope and maybe pull in people, but you may have your hand forced, where if your rivals go that way, you really can't.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. So I think, and a lot of times you do get people coming into the company because, they were saying I had to go in the office 5 days a week. That's not something I was interested in doing, or I was going to have to relocate to, to Princeton, New Jersey, to Biotech Triangle, and I didn't want to do that. So yeah, I think that's a big element, and it can be a competitive advantage, or it is also, but it also puts a lot of strain on your internal logistics, your internal HR, and that kind of thing too, because managing a workforce that is not on site is a very different principle than managing a force that has a headquarters, has an identity, has a gathering place. Now, things like Amgen, they already have a large remote force because you have things like sales forces. So you have thousands of sales reps out there. So you're used to managing those field people who are kind of sitting all over the world. So I think that was a little bit of an advantage in the biotech and pharma industries because you already had that experience. But if you take something like a Facebook or a Netflix where they just had kind of their big location, that's a different thing for them. They don't really have that kind of infrastructure in place to support a remote workforce necessarily. And it's a big investment to get to that standpoint, both financially, but also culturally. So I think that it just, we had a little bit of a leg up. For the most part, pharma has said, yeah, wherever you want to work is fine with, minimum, if you're in for the important meetings, I guess you can say. But yeah, it could absolutely be a competitive advantage depending on how you want to feel about it and how you think about that as you're entering the workforce. And I've thought this is the difficult part is a big part of my career has been about who I network with and who I meet and who I get to learn from and who are my mentors and who am I seeing as I'm sitting in the courtyard, like from an executive standpoint. And I think that's going to be really challenging. So I think it's something that you guys want to consider as you're going into your careers. Do I want that remote workforce, that flexibility? I can live where I want, or do I want an environment where I'm immersed in my company and I'm immersed in that environment? And I had the benefit, all of us had the benefit of that was just the norm when we came out of school. So there have to be ways, and you have to consciously think about how do I make up for that gap, for the fact that if I am working remotely for a company that works remotely, how do I still build those relationships? How am I thoughtfully setting meetings on people's calendars, having coffee chats? How am I reaching out to people, even though we're in this kind of virtual environment? So that would be the advice there and the consideration as you guys are thinking about what companies, what internships you want to do. How are you building those connections in a virtual environment?
It seems like something that for people who are new, they need to be more persistent because people, in your career, people want to meet with you, but you're starting out, nobody wants to meet with you. You're the one that's got to learn how to reach out and make that engagement.
Exactly.
So that's a great point. So Mark, somebody who's in the office, though you appear to be the only one, so you may or may not be wearing any pants. We're not sure.
Yeah, it's like a broadcaster's outfit. So it's just up to your imagination. Yeah, no, I think what Stephanie said is spot on. Listen, this is a Friday. I come in on Fridays. I can work from. I live very close to the office, to be fair, right? So I'm a 7-minute bike ride into the office in the morning. For me, sometimes I work from home, very rarely. But on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, this floor is a little bit more invigorated than this. And I think for me, what I've learned is, I take 2 days a week where I do different things. Right. I do more critical thinking on Mondays and Fridays and kind of bigger picture ideas and investing. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when it is a little more lively, I'm talking and communicating and trying to figure out some of the things that I might have questions on about other products and this, that, and the other. So I kind of utilize my time based upon this new environment. Right. So now if I was a young person, I would personally try to go somewhere where I could be in the office as much as possible. Right, you really want to utilize resources, and it's a very strange environment for young professionals right now who come into this remote environment in terms of how they can go about utilizing resources and utilizing senior management and other people who might know things that they don't know yet. So I would favor as much office as I possibly could, even if it's a little bleak some days. I would still favor going in and setting the tone that way. In terms of the job market, I know it was a two-pronged question. I think it's going to be a little tough. It's going to be a little harder for the next couple of years. I really do. And I think it's just beginning. If you look at, and I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here, but if you look at the landscape over the last 4 or 5 months, the tech sector has basically stopped hiring completely. Stephanie is very fortunate to work in an industry that's probably been, the rotation out of tech into healthcare. Healthcare has been very strong still, but I will tell you that, in an environment like this, I have a feeling spending is going to be at the forefront of all C-suites' minds. And I think it's just gonna be a little tougher job picture. So, ways you can combat that is just getting in somewhere, even if it's not your number one choice that is hiring, and just, working as hard as you can. The MBA right out of undergrad thing, I do think in an environment like this, to be honest with you, that the story you can paint 2 years down the road, employers will listen to. I don't know if you're going to get as much out of an MBA as you normally would if you had some work experience, to be very honest with you. But I think that the avenue of doing it, I favor experience first, but in this environment, maybe it's something that employers will be more welcome to a couple years from the road. Doesn't mean that people aren't hiring. I just think that I came from the investment bank world where the average intern class next year at my previous employer for my division went from 50 to 38. Okay, so just think about that. That's scaling down 20%, 15, 20% at the intern level, which means our analyst level is going to scale down 15, 20% too. Now, doesn't mean there's going to be not going to be a rebirth eventually too. That there's going to be this great growth period we're going to have, but it's just not there yet. So I would just focus on relationships, meeting people, networking as much as you can, and getting your foot in the door, because it is going to be a little harder.
So would you think, say if you were out a couple of years, maybe you're a junior analyst, maybe 2-3 years in, would this be the time to start thinking about going back, because you have a down economy, you're going to have your opportunity cost of going back to schools might be lower than it otherwise would. Would that be your suggestion?
Listen, the thing that worries me the most about that, okay, though, it really is when you come out of the MBA program, where the economy is and what would have happened if you just stuck it through. I don't know the answer to that, but to me, it could be a very big concern. So that's what I would say to that. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is, but I would be concerned just a little bit about the forward there.
Yeah, a lot of people use that MBA time if you're looking to change careers. So that's, one, big pivot point. So you've been in your career 10 years and now you're like, I want to try something different. So you go to MBA, to an MBA school, because it is, yes, the classes and the experience, but then there is also, massive resources on the other side from a career advancement standpoint, finding new jobs. Now, I did my MBA because, I always wanted to get one, and my company paid for it. So I just kept working. So I didn't actually have to worry about what Mark is saying, where if you go back full time, then you're like, okay, well, shoot, now I need to find a whole new job. So that's something different, because I just continued on my career and then added to the training on top of it, because who needs sleep? Nobody needs sleep. Then you don't need that. And then, so that's the other opportunity. And then, going straight out of school, it's good. There are programs designed for that, but I'm 100% with Mark. You get so much more out of it if you have experience under your belt, because then also the people in your class have experience under your belt. I did an executive MBA program with UCLA and the National University of Singapore, and the average age of people in my class was 44. And so I was young for my class, but I got so much out of it because these were experienced executives and they brought their own stories and their own experiences into the class, and you learned from them. So yep, there are pros and cons. And if anybody had any questions about that, I'm happy to talk offline with anybody that wants about my own experience and my thoughts on MBA and timing.
I'll just follow up real quick. I did my executive MBA as well at Columbia, and the average age I think was 39. And one of the guys in my class is CEO of IBM Watson, right? Like, he's in that kind of experience and learning from people like that, and not to mention having relationships with those guys and girls on the follow is really important. I do think that you get stretched a little thin doing an MBA at 24.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of MBA is who you go with and making those connections. Stephen, let me ask you. So in the hiring side at FedEx, I mean, we've come through a part where it's hard to get people. Do you feel like you're going to be more reluctant to, if the economy starts to slow, to cut jobs? And if so, maybe just tell me a little bit about the hiring picture there and your kind of thoughts around some of these issues.
Well, we have two aspects to it. We have a large hourly workforce, which is one thing, and then there's the salaried staff, and so they're kind of on different paths. Hourly hiring challenges are always local, based on what the labor force looks like. I know the hiring situation here in Memphis is challenging. For hourly, for salaried, I haven't seen that quite so much. We've continued to replace staff through lockdown and work from home, it has been a challenge onboarding new employees whilst working remotely. I was lucky coming off of 3 years where I was parked in a sales force, like Stephanie alluded to. Sales organizations are perfectly comfortable working from wherever in the world and having distributed workforces. We have to be close to our customers, and our customers are all over the place. So when lockdown hit and they tell me to go home, laptop, internet connection, cell phone, great, I can work. I was working from hotels and airports and customer sites for years. Before that, I did my MBA was remote. So the IMBA from Whitman. And then for me, once the novelty of it wore off, I looked at it as an opportunity to really have the flexibility to work where I needed to be working. If I need to go down to the airport in Memphis to our sort facility and work there, that's where I work. If I need to go to the headquarters, I go there. If I don't, I worked with Asia for years, and those phone calls all took place at night from home anyway. So if it makes sense for me to work from home, I can do that too. I know I had an intern through last summer. Last summer. Having an intern during work from home was challenging. That was really interesting, and I can see where work from home has affected new employees the most because they don't get exposed to more experienced coworkers. They don't get the network opportunities that maybe we had when we first got hired at companies where you see everybody every day. And it also, for me, became I really had to micromanage the scheduling aspect of it because I couldn't rely on just showing up. Everybody shows up for work every morning at 8 o'clock and we figure out what we're doing for the rest of the day. If you wait until 8 o'clock in the morning when you're working from home, you've already failed. So a little bit more planning, but it was just another problem to be worked through. And I think I was fairly successful at that. I had a mechanical engineer for an intern, and we were working on sort systems, construction, systems being installed, and processes. So it has definitely made life interesting.
Well, kind of going from you're mentioning interns, and we have a question in the Q&A around networking and networking for students to get internships. Once you're into an organization, how do you network? So from 3 experienced professionals' perspective, how would you want prospective college students or junior level employees, how should they reach out and network with you so that they can kind of get the most out of their experience and interactions with you and make those types of connections? I'll just kind of go around the board until this open it up. Stephanie, you look like you're ready to say something.
I'm ready. Yeah, no, I like this. Coaching is a big part of how I treat my team and the folks across the company. But so for me, if you're an intern, I would say it starts with your manager. So ask your manager and say, hey, this is what I want to do. Can you put me in touch with 3 people that you'd recommend that I speak with? And then it snowballs from there. Now, sometimes you get a manager who's not engaged. And then from that perspective, you will always be working with somebody. So spend that extra minute up front of the call, introducing yourself. Go into your personal life a little bit, ask them about if they have any kids or what they like to do. You'll find some kind of common ground. Don't just go straight into that work discussion, especially if it's somebody that you think that could be a good mentor for you, or it could be, and then just ask. I would say, anybody that comes to me and say, hey, would you mind if I just set up 30 minutes with you and we can just talk a little bit about your career and how you got here? I will never say no. Nobody is so busy where they can't even do 25 minutes. So I'd say just make sure to ask. But that would be my first, recommendation. Start with your manager and say, I really like you to introduce me to 3 people that you think would be worth talking to. Because usually what happens after that is those 3 people will also have people that they can talk to. So I'd say start there. If your manager is not engaged, just somebody that you're working with on a project or somebody you come across, or even just reach out to somebody who you saw present and say, hey, I saw you present in this meeting. I would love to just talk to you. I'm new, I'm an intern. I would say that most executives who are worth, who are actually worth talking to would never turn you down if they can help it. So I would just say, yeah, be cognizant of that. And then also try to bring in those little personal touches up front that'll even help those relationships blossom a little bit too.
Mark?
Honestly, for the sake of airtime, when somebody answers a question that amazingly, you just go like this, and then you go to the next one. Because I would echo everything she said.
Yeah. So
literally.
Yeah, maybe a slightly different question. So when you were an undergrad or in MBA, what were your network strategies to get out and to start reaching out to professionals so you could get your foot in the door, either for an internship or that first position out of that?
Yeah.
career?
Things were a little different back then. I'll say that. There was no LinkedIn, or maybe it was in the nascent phases, to be honest with you. That's what I always tell a story. Like, I interviewed at every single company that I possibly could when I was at Syracuse. I think I got job offers from 27 places, and I interviewed everywhere. Why? I had no bearing, honestly. Like, there's a company, I'm not going to mention its name. I had no bearing working for the company. I just wanted the experience. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to maybe catch somebody who would actually jump on and I could latch on and be a mentor to, even if I didn't get the job there. So I used as many real interview experiences as I could, not just the mock ones, to really help myself for the ones I really thought were important. So I kind of over interviewed, but from doing that, you meet a lot of people who are relatively senior at these companies. And one of them actually ended up helping me a great deal 4 years later on in life in my career. I had no idea it was going to work out that way. And I met him in an interview room when I was a junior. So you just never know where you're going to run into people as you go down the road, and you won't find those experiences of those people if you're not trying. So, Stephanie said, hey, show us take time. I do the same thing. I mentor actively, usually 5 to 6 students a year, but it's the people who reach out, right? And I'm not saying like a LinkedIn email that says, hey, this is me reaching out. It's something a little bit deeper, like, hey, I really have an interest in what you do. Is there a way we could just establish a little bit of a dialogue and whatever, and here's how we can help each other a little bit, because it helps me when people do good things and I can help them along the way. It makes me feel good. It's a sense of giving back. But you have to really kind of want to be that person. And I think people really do. The other thing I'll say is people really are open to giving their time to help you. And the people who don't think that the resources are there, you're missing out on a lot of experience and a big network that can really help you out. And in a harder job environment, the more relationships you have, you never know when you're going to catch that fish. Just like that guy helped me 4 years later, you never know who's going to be that person that could help you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I've seen the same thing where people who you think were very famous and would be out of your reach, if you ask, sometimes will actually take the time. So, Stephen, what are some of your tips for networking, getting your foot in the door?
I was just going to add to some of what everybody else was saying. One of the things I liked about being a manager was that as long as I wasn't discussing anything illegal, unethical, or immoral, I could never waste my time talking to an employee about anything. And you never know what kind of relationships you're going to be establishing. The more you develop that bond between yourself and your employee, no matter what, you get to find out what's important to them. And so you should seek people who feel that way. If you find yourself in front of a good manager, they probably feel the same way. You can talk about anything. That's what they're getting paid to do. And as long as you enjoy people, you can be a good manager. I think that's an essential element for being a good manager. I have seen examples of people who got into management don't really like people, and it's a problem. It's kind of a prerequisite.
So if we're kind of getting close to the end of our time, let me give you each a couple minutes. Maybe you tell me what's your, over the next couple of years, which one are your main career goals or goals within your organization to achieve that you're maybe thinking about striving for here? Stephanie, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, the longer you get in your career, it's you're like, I don't want to know what I want to be when I grow up. I think, what I've learned is that that's okay. You don't have to have like this pinnacle role that you're working towards your entire career. And that, as you learn new things, then that changes. So, I think it's really important to know what you don't want to do. I've spent enough time in the commercial organization where I probably don't want to be in sales. I know I'm really strong in operations, so I'll probably be, more on the operations side, even if it's commercial, but that's also transferable to, more corporate functions. My background's in finance, I could do that. So understanding kind of where your interests are, I think is important. And also understanding what you're willing to put in, what you're willing to give up. Sometimes some of these big executive C-suite roles, in order to get there, in order to put in the time to actually make it to those kinds of roles, that's not everybody's hope in life. I mean, there's more to life than just working, right? I've spent a lot of my career working, and I'm very ambitious, and I have strong ambitions to be up there. But then you get closer and you start to see what it takes to be there, both from a political standpoint as well as just the hours and the commitment and the willingness to pick up and move to Belgium to run that country for a while with whatever family. And so, I mean, I think it's knowing your limits and knowing what you're willing to put in, and then also along the way, learning what you don't want to do is just as important as what you do want to do.
Mark, any big objectives on the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, personally, I've been a sell side employee at an investment bank for 20 years ish, and I've run businesses, and now I have this job where I'm still almost doing the same thing, but I'm pivoting to being a full-time investor, right? And to instead of putting clients together, I'm now the client trying to make the right decisions. So for me, the next 2-3 years it's really about, developing the process I think I'm developing, honing it, tweaking it, and trying to become as good of investor in forecasting the market as best I can. So it's kind of fun for me at this age of my career to almost have like a rebirth in a sense. Like it's very similar, but it's very new. I've had aspirations of being an executive, and just, I always tell myself, I want everything in my life to have a positive slope to it. So I want my career to be positive sloping. I would like to have relationships with family and friends to be positive sloping. I like to just create really strong situations for myself, and always try to grow them. And so for me right now, I'm in a whole new paradigm, and I'm going to try to make the best of it. And that's kind of my focus.
Great. Stephen, you want to take us home?
I spent 15 years at FedEx trying to avoid technology projects, and now I'm in charge of one. It's been a real growing process for me. I've learned a lot. I've had to dip back into my computer science degree, which I thought I was never going to use again. But the more I am in that process, the more I see about the way things are going, my priority is to automate as many tasks as humanly possible, not to replace employees, but because we don't have enough employees and we can't afford to have enough employees. So we got to convert some of that labor into some of the labor costs into capital costs, and really just automate as many tasks as possible, and leave all the thinking tasks to the employees. Can't emphasize that enough. Every time I run into a problem, the first question I ask is, how can we automate this? because it is tough. It is tough to replace employees.
Interesting. No, it sounds like the exciting chance to go back to the computer science side and bring that back out. And
Had to crack my network engineering textbook the other day.
yeah, don't throw some of those things away. But that's a very common theme that I hear from everyone, especially anybody on the operations side, that they're facing that challenge. So with that, we're pretty much out of time. Is there any closing comments that anybody would like to make?
I just wanted to address in the Q&A, somebody asked if they can reach out to us. Please, yes, please share, my information. I'm happy to talk to anybody offline and if anybody has any questions or wanted to have a conversation, more than happy to. And I know that Mark and Stephen are as well. So thanks for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all for coming and giving us such great insight.